My daughter stood in my living room on that cold November evening, tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking as she screamed words that would haunt me forever. "I've been living a lie for years, Mom. Everything has been a lie." I slowly reached up and took off my reading glasses, the ones I always wore when I was trying to see things clearly. I looked directly into her eyes, searching for the daughter I thought I knew, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. There was something hiding behind those tears, something dark and calculated that I had never seen before. That same night after she stormed out of my house, I sat alone in the darkness and made one phone call that would change both of our lives forever. A call she never expected, a call that would expose secrets buried so deep, even I couldn't have imagined the truth. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Thompson, and at 67 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I had buried a husband, raised 3 children on a waitress salary, and survived more heartbreak than most people endure in 2 lifetimes. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what my own daughter was about to do to me. For over 4 decades, I had been the kind of mother who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. When my husband Richard died of a heart attack 30 years ago, leaving me with 3 kids under the age of 15, I didn't fall apart. I worked double shifts at the diner, took in sewing on weekends, and somehow kept food on the table and clothes on their backs. I wore the same winter coat for 12 years because every spare dollar went to my children's future. Everyone in our small town of Maplewood, Ohio, knew me as Sweet Margaret, the woman who never missed a church bake sale, who volunteered at every school event, who babysat neighbor kids for free when their parents needed help. My hands were always busy, baking cookies, knitting scarves, tending to my little garden of roses and tomatoes. I lived in the same modest 2-bedroom house on Elm Street for 40 years, its walls covered with photographs of birthday parties, graduations, and family holidays. Every picture told a story of love, sacrifice, and a mother's unconditional devotion. My daughter, Sarah, was my firstborn, my confidant, the one I trusted with my deepest secrets and my dying wishes. I truly believed that all those years of sacrifice had built a bond that nothing could break. I believed that love and dedication would always be enough. I was wrong. Life had finally settled into a rhythm that felt almost perfect. After decades of struggle and hardship, I had reached a place of peace that I never thought possible. Every Sunday, without fail, Sarah would pull into my driveway at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon with her husband Michael and my 2 precious grandchildren, Emma and Jake. The sound of their car doors slamming and the kids shouting, "Grandma!" as they ran up my front walkway was the highlight of my entire week. We would gather around my old oak dining table, the same table where I had served countless meals during the lean years when dinner was often just beans and rice stretched to feed 4 hungry mouths. Now that table was covered with abundance, pot roast and mashed potatoes, fresh bread I had baked that morning, and always a homemade pie cooling on the windowsill. Sarah and I would spend hours in the kitchen together, just like when she was a little girl. She would chop vegetables while I stirred gravy, and we would talk about everything and nothing. She told me about her job at the accounting firm, about Emma's struggle with math homework, about the new restaurant that opened downtown. I shared stories about my volunteering at the Maplewood Public Library, where every Tuesday and Thursday morning I read stories to wide-eyed children who sat cross-legged on the carpet. Those moments made me feel useful, needed, like I still had purpose beyond my years. My daily routine was simple, but deeply fulfilling. I would wake up at 6 in the morning, make myself a cup of coffee, and sit on my back porch watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Then I would tend to my garden, the small plot of earth where I grew the most beautiful tomatoes in the neighborhood and roses that bloomed in brilliant reds and yellows. My afternoons were spent knitting blankets for the homeless shelter downtown, each stitch a meditation, each finished blanket a small act of love sent out into the world. I had knitted 47 blankets in the past 2 years, and knowing they kept someone warm on cold nights filled my heart with quiet joy. But the best part of every single day was 7 o'clock in the evening. That was when Sarah called. Like clockwork, her voice bright and cheerful on the other end of the line. "Just checking on you, Mom," she would say. And those 5 words made me feel like the luckiest mother alive. I had no reason to suspect, not even the slightest inkling, that this beautiful routine was nothing but a carefully constructed lie. I had no idea that while I was counting my blessings, my own daughter was counting my money and planning how to take everything I had worked my entire life to build. It started on a Thursday afternoon in late September, one of those perfect autumn days when the leaves were just beginning to turn golden and the air carried that crisp hint of the coming winter. I had spent the morning baking my famous apple pie, the recipe my own mother had taught me 60 years ago, using apples from the farmer's market and extra cinnamon just the way Sarah loved it. I decided to surprise her by dropping it off at her house on Riverside Drive, the beautiful colonial she and Michael had bought 5 years ago. As I pulled up to the curb, balancing the still warm pie in my hands, I felt that familiar flutter of joy that came from doing something nice for my daughter. I walked up the stone pathway toward the front door, admiring the mums Sarah had planted in the flower beds, when I heard voices coming through the living room window that had been left slightly open. I recognized Sarah's voice immediately, but the tone stopped me dead in my tracks. It was sharp, cold, dripping with contempt in a way I had never heard from her before. "She won't know anything until it's too late," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the crisp air. "The old woman barely understands how banks work. She still writes checks and uses a flip phone, for God's sake." Old woman? My heart began to pound in my chest. Was she talking about me? I stood there frozen on the walkway, the pie growing heavy in my trembling hands, straining to hear more. But then I heard footsteps approaching the door, and I knew I had only seconds. I quickly composed myself and knocked, forcing a smile onto my face even though my insides felt like they were twisting into knots. The door swung open, and there was Sarah, her expression transforming instantly from whatever it had been moments before into that familiar, bright, loving smile that I knew so well. "Mom! What a wonderful surprise!" she exclaimed, pulling me into a warm hug that suddenly felt wrong. Like everything about it was performance rather than genuine affection. I searched her face, looking deep into her eyes for some explanation, some sign of what I had just heard, but she seemed perfectly normal, perfectly innocent. "I brought you an apple pie," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "I know it's your favorite." She took the pie, gushing about how sweet I was, how thoughtful, how she didn't deserve such a wonderful mother. We made small talk for maybe 10 minutes, discussing the weather and her plans for the weekend, but the whole time my mind was racing. I couldn't stop replaying those words. Old woman. She won't know. Too late. As I drove home, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Maybe I had misheard her. Maybe she was talking about someone else entirely, perhaps a difficult client at work or a neighbor. My hearing had been getting worse lately. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that loneliness and age were making me imagine threats where none existed. For the next 2 weeks, I did everything in my power to push that afternoon out of my mind. I convinced myself that I was being ridiculous, that my imagination was running wild over nothing. Sarah continued her nightly phone calls at 7 o'clock sharp, her voice filled with warmth and concern as she asked about my day and told me about hers. She brought the grandchildren over that following Sunday just like always, and we had our usual wonderful dinner together. Emma showed me her latest art project from school, a painting of our family that she had done with such care and love. Jake climbed into my lap and asked me to tell him the story about when his mother was a little girl and got stuck in the neighbor's tree. Everything seemed so perfectly normal, so impossibly loving, that I felt ashamed for ever doubting my own daughter. When my friend Betty cornered me after church service one Sunday morning, her kind eyes full of concern, I brushed off her worries with practiced ease. "Margaret, you seem distracted lately," she said gently, touching my arm. "Is everything all right with you, dear?" I forced out a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Oh, Betty, you know me, just getting old and forgetful. My mind wanders more these days." She looked at me skeptically but didn't push further, and I was grateful for that. I couldn't bear to voice my suspicions out loud because saying them would make them real, and I desperately needed them not to be real. I threw myself into my routines with almost manic energy, as if staying busy enough would silence the nagging doubt that had taken root in the back of my mind. I baked 3 pies instead of 1. I volunteered for extra shifts at the library, reading to children until my voice grew hoarse. I knitted blankets late into the night, my needles clicking rhythmically in the silence of my empty house, each stitch an attempt to weave together the unraveling sense of security I had always felt. I scrubbed my kitchen floor on my hands and knees, even though it was already spotless. I reorganized my closets, pulling out old photo albums and spending hours looking at pictures of Sarah as a baby, as a toddler, as a young woman on her wedding day. Sarah had always been such a good daughter, I told myself over and over like a prayer. She was the one who drove me to my doctor's appointments without complaint, who patiently helped me figure out how to use my computer when I got confused by all the buttons and screens, who promised me with tears in her eyes that she would always take care of me when I got too old to manage on my own. How could I possibly suspect her of anything sinister? What kind of ungrateful, paranoid old woman doubts the child she raised, the daughter who had never given me any real reason not to trust her? I was being unfair, letting my loneliness and fear create monsters where there were none. That's what I told myself. That's what I needed to believe, because the alternative, that my own flesh and blood might actually wish me harm, was simply too painful to accept. The evidence arrived on a gray, rainy Tuesday morning in mid-October, the kind of dreary day where the sky hung low and heavy with clouds that threatened but never quite delivered a storm. I was standing in my kitchen making oatmeal when I heard the mail slot clatter, and I shuffled to the front door in my slippers to collect the usual assortment of bills and advertisements. Among the junk mail was a plain white envelope with the logo of First National Bank printed in the corner. My stomach dropped before I even knew why. Something about that envelope felt wrong, ominous, like it carried news that would shatter the fragile denial I had been clinging to for weeks. With trembling hands, I tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a routine notification letter, the kind banks send out for account changes, written in that cold, impersonal corporate language that makes everything sound sterile and official. But the words I read made my knees go weak. "Dear Mrs. Thompson, this letter is to inform you that a second authorized user has been added to your savings account ending in 7742. As of July 15th, Sarah Mitchell now has full access and withdrawal privileges to this account." The paper slipped from my fingers and floated to the floor like a fallen leaf. July 15th. That was 3 months ago. 3 entire months that Sarah had been on my account without my knowledge, without my permission, without even mentioning it during our countless phone calls and Sunday dinners. My savings account, the one that held $83,417, every single penny I had left in this world, money I had scraped together from Social Security checks, from the modest life insurance policy Richard had left behind, from years of denying myself even small luxuries so I would have something to fall back on in my final years. Money that represented my security, my independence, my ability to stay in my own home and not become a burden to anyone. I stood there in my hallway, rain pattering against the windows, staring at that letter on the floor, and felt the world tilt beneath my feet. My mind raced through possibilities, desperately searching for innocent explanations. Maybe there had been a mistake at the bank. Maybe someone had stolen my identity. Maybe Sarah had done this to help me somehow and just forgot to mention it. But deep down, in that place where we keep truths too terrible to acknowledge, I knew exactly what this meant. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed the bank's customer service number printed at the bottom of the letter. I had to try 3 times because my fingers kept hitting the wrong buttons. Finally, a cheerful young woman answered. "First National Bank, this is Jennifer. How may I help you today?" My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Yes, hello, my name is Margaret Thompson, and I just received a letter about changes to my account, but I never authorized anyone to be added." There was a pause, some typing on a keyboard. "Let me pull up your account, Mrs. Thompson. Can you verify your Social Security number for me?" After confirming my identity and going through what felt like endless security questions, Jennifer put me on hold. The tinny elevator music playing in my ear felt like mockery as I paced my kitchen floor, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. When she finally came back on the line, her cheerful tone had shifted to something more careful, more measured. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm looking at the paperwork right now. The authorization form was filed on July 15th with your signature, adding Sarah Mitchell as a joint account holder with full privileges. Is there a problem with this?" My voice cracked as I responded. "I never signed anything. I never authorized this. I didn't even know about it until this morning." There was another long pause. "Mrs. Thompson, I think you should come into the branch to review these documents in person. Would you be able to come in this afternoon?" I agreed immediately, hung up the phone, and just stood there staring at nothing, feeling like the floor had opened up beneath me. 2 hours later, I sat in a small office at the bank across from Patricia Hernandez, the branch manager, a kind-looking woman in her 50s with sympathetic eyes that made me want to cry. She slid a manila folder across the desk toward me. Inside was a photocopy of an authorization form, dated July 15th, with neat check marks in all the right boxes, and at the bottom, clear as day, was my signature. My exact signature, the careful cursive M and T that I had written thousands of times over my lifetime, but I had never seen this paper before in my life. "Mrs. Thompson," Patricia said gently, "do you remember signing this document?" I shook my head, tears beginning to blur my vision. I've never seen this before. I would never add someone to my account without discussing it with them first. I would remember something this important. Patricia's expression grew more serious. "I have to ask you this, and please don't take offense, but has anyone had access to your personal documents recently? Your checkbook, your identification, anything with your signature on it?" And that's when the memory hit me like a physical blow. 4 months ago, in early July, Sarah had come over specifically to help me organize my filing cabinet. She said it was getting too cluttered, that I needed to sort through old papers and get everything in order. We had spent an entire afternoon together, and she had been so helpful, so patient, sorting through decades of documents, tax returns, old bills, insurance papers. She'd even made copies of my important documents, she said, just in case something ever happened to the originals. I looked up at Patricia, and the understanding that passed between us needed no words. "My daughter," I whispered. "My daughter helped me organize my files in July." Patricia nodded slowly, her face full of compassion and regret. "Mrs. Thompson, I think we need to file a fraud report. What you're describing could be forgery and financial exploitation. I'm going to recommend you speak with the police and possibly an attorney who specializes in elder financial abuse." I left the bank in a daze, clutching copies of the forged documents in my hands, and drove straight to Sarah's house without even thinking. My whole body was shaking with a mixture of fury, heartbreak, and disbelief. I needed to hear it from her own mouth. I needed to look my daughter in the eyes and have her tell me this was all some terrible misunderstanding. When I pulled into her driveway and saw her car there, I didn't hesitate. I marched up to that front door and pounded on it with more force than my frail fists should have been capable of. Sarah opened it with her usual smile, but it faltered the moment she saw my face and the papers clutched in my trembling hands. "Mom, what's wrong? You look upset." Her voice had that concerned, caring tone that now felt like nails on a chalkboard. I held up the bank documents, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Did you forge my signature to put yourself on my bank account? Did you steal access to my money?" For just a fraction of a second, I saw it, the mask slipping, guilt flashing across her features before she recovered and plastered on an expression of confused innocence. "Mom, you're not making sense. You signed those papers yourself. We talked about this, remember? You wanted to make things easier in case something happened to you." "Don't you dare lie to me." The words exploded out of me louder than I had ever spoken to her in 43 years. "I never signed those papers, Sarah. I never even saw them. You forged my signature. You violated my trust. You stole from your own mother." The neighbors could probably hear me screaming, but I didn't care anymore. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, and I watched my daughter's face transform from fake concern into something cold and hard that I didn't recognize. "Fine," she said finally, her voice flat and emotionless. "Yes, I did it. And honestly, Mom, it's for your own good. You're getting older, making questionable decisions. Someone needs to protect that money before you give it all away to every charity that sends you a letter or waste it on things you don't need." I stumbled backward, as if she had physically struck me. "Protect it? You mean steal it?" Sarah sighed, the kind of exasperated sigh you give a difficult child. "I mean, manage it responsibly. Besides, it's not just your money anymore, and it's not just me. Michael and I have been planning this for months." Those words, "planning this for months," hit me like ice water. "Planning what?" I whispered. Sarah glanced behind her, then stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed. When she spoke again, her voice was low and calculated. "Mom, let's be realistic here. You're sitting on a house worth at least $400,000 in today's market, plus that savings account. That's almost $500,000 that you're just hoarding while your own children are drowning in debt, struggling with mortgages and college funds for your grandchildren. I felt the world spinning around me. You want my house? You want to take my home?" She actually rolled her eyes at me. "We want what we're entitled to, what's rightfully ours as your children. You've already lived your life, Mom. You had your time. We're the ones struggling now, and you're sitting here being selfish, holding on to everything like you're going to live forever." She pulled out her phone with hands that weren't even shaking, scrolled through it with the casual ease of someone checking a grocery list, and then turned the screen toward me. I saw documents, official-looking papers with legal language and highlighted sections. "Michael and I have already consulted with an attorney," she said matter-of-factly. "We've been researching how to get medical power of attorney over you, how to have you declared legally incompetent so we can make decisions on your behalf. We can sell the house, put you in a nice assisted living facility, and split the proceeds. David and Rebecca are on board too. We've already talked to them and worked out how to divide everything fairly among the three of us." David, Rebecca, my other two children. They were all in on this together. My entire family had gathered in secret, probably around someone's dining room table, and divided up my life like I was already dead and buried. They had calculated the worth of my existence down to the dollar, made spreadsheets and plans, consulted lawyers, all while smiling to my face and calling me every evening to ask how my day was. I couldn't breathe. The porch seemed to tilt beneath my feet, and I had to grab the railing to keep from falling. I drove home, barely seeing the road through the tears that poured down my face in rivers. I don't even remember the drive, just suddenly finding myself parked in my own driveway, staring at the house I had lived in for 40 years, the house where I had raised my children and buried my husband's memory in every corner. Inside, I collapsed onto the living room couch, the same floral patterned couch where I used to rock my babies to sleep when they woke up crying in the night. My body shook with sobs that seemed to come from some deep, broken place inside me that I didn't even know existed. I looked around at my walls covered with family photographs. Sarah's first day of kindergarten, gap-toothed and grinning. David's high school graduation. Rebecca's wedding day. Pictures of birthday parties I had thrown on almost no money. Crepe paper streamers I had hung myself and cakes I had baked from scratch because we couldn't afford bakery prices. Christmas mornings where I had gone without gifts so my children could have them, wearing the same old sweater year after year while they tore into presents under the tree. I remembered the night Sarah had pneumonia when she was 7 years old, her tiny body burning with fever. I had held her in my arms all night long in the emergency room, praying to God to let her live, promising I would do anything, give anything, if she could just be okay. I remembered selling my wedding ring, the only piece of jewelry I owned that had any value, to pay for her college textbooks when she got accepted to State University. I had told her it was fine, that I didn't need it anymore, that her education was more important than a piece of metal on my finger. I remembered every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal I had skipped so they could eat, every dream of my own I had abandoned so theirs could come true. And this was my reward. This was what all that love had earned me. My own children saw me not as their mother, not as a human being who had given them life and devoted her entire existence to their happiness, but as nothing more than an obstacle standing between them and money. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was just an asset to be liquidated, a problem to be solved, an old woman who had outlived her usefulness and needed to be swept aside. I cried until there were no tears left in my body, until my eyes were swollen and my throat was raw, until the darkness outside my windows deepened and the house grew cold around me. I sat there in the silence, surrounded by the ghosts of who my children used to be, or perhaps who I had foolishly believed them to be. The grandfather clock in the hallway, the one Richard and I had bought at an estate sale 35 years ago, chimed midnight. 12 heavy gongs that echoed through the empty rooms like a wake-up call from the universe itself. Something shifted inside me in that moment. I wiped my face with the backs of my hands, stood up on shaky legs, and walked to the bathroom. I turned on the light and looked at myself in the mirror, really looked, for the first time in a long time. I saw a woman with gray hair and wrinkles earned through decades of worry and hard work. I saw tired eyes that had cried too many tears, but I also saw something else. I saw a woman who had survived poverty when she had 3 kids and $50 in the bank. I saw a woman who had buried a husband at 37 and didn't crumble. I saw a woman who had worked 2 jobs for 15 years straight and never once complained. I saw a survivor, a fighter, someone who had earned every single thing she had through blood, sweat, and sheer determination. And I realized something crucial, something that cut through the grief like a knife through butter. I was not dead yet. I was 67 years old, but I was healthy, sharp-minded, and perfectly capable of taking care of myself. They had underestimated me. They had looked at my gray hair and assumed I was weak, looked at my kindness and assumed I was stupid, looked at my age and assumed I was helpless. They thought I would just roll over and accept this betrayal, that I would be too confused or too afraid to fight back. They had counted on my love for them to make me compliant, to keep me from defending myself. They were wrong. Dead wrong. I had spent my entire life being kind, being selfless, being the woman who always put everyone else first. I had sacrificed and given until there was almost nothing left. And where had it gotten me? My own children were conspiring to rob me of everything I had worked for. Well, no more. If they wanted a fight, if they wanted to see what this old woman was really capable of, then I would give them exactly that. I walked into my kitchen, made myself a cup of hot tea with hands that were steady now, calm now, and sat down at the table with a notepad and pen. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but it had transformed into something else, something harder, something dangerous. I began making a list, writing in the careful script I had learned in grade school 70 years ago. I needed proof of what they had done. I needed allies who would believe me and help me. I needed a plan that was airtight and unbreakable. Most importantly, I needed to be smart about this, to think 3 steps ahead the way they had been thinking ahead of me. By the time the sun began to rise, painting my kitchen in shades of pink and gold, I had filled 3 pages with notes. I knew exactly what needed to be done. I knew who to call and what to say. They had declared war on someone they thought was a weak, foolish old woman who would go down without a fight. They were about to learn the hardest lesson of their lives. They were about to discover that the fiercest person you will ever face is a mother who has been betrayed by the children she would have died for. The next morning, I waited until exactly 9 o'clock when I knew offices would be open, and then I made my first call. My hands were steady as I dialed the number for Dorothy Brennan, my oldest friend from church, whose son happened to be James Brennan, one of the most respected elder law attorneys in the state. Dorothy answered on the second ring, her familiar voice warm and welcoming. "Margaret, what a lovely surprise." I took a deep breath and said the words I never thought I would have to say. "Dorothy, I need your help. My children are trying to steal everything I have, and I need to speak with James as soon as possible." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a heartbeat before Dorothy's voice turned steel hard with protective fury. "I'm calling him right now. Can you be at his office at 2 o'clock this afternoon?" Within hours, I was sitting in a sleek downtown law office, recording everything that had happened while James listened intently, his pen moving rapidly across a legal pad. He was a sharp-looking man in his early 40s with kind eyes that reminded me of his mother. When I finished speaking, showing him the forged bank documents and telling him about Sarah's admission and the conspiracy with my other children, he leaned back in his chair and smiled grimly. "Margaret, what they've done isn't just morally reprehensible, it's illegal on multiple levels. We're talking about forgery, financial exploitation of an elderly person, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted coercion. These are serious crimes, and we have more than enough to bury them." He tapped his pen against his desk thoughtfully. "But I suspect you want more than just legal action. You want them to understand what they've done, to feel the consequences of their betrayal." I nodded, and for the first time in days, I felt a small smile cross my face. "I want justice, James, real justice." Over the next week, we built my case meticulously. James helped me file a formal fraud report with the bank, and we froze the joint account immediately so Sarah couldn't access a single penny. We filed a police report documenting the forgery and financial exploitation. But the legal moves were just the beginning. I wanted evidence, ironclad proof that would leave no room for them to lie their way out of what they had done. James recommended a private investigator who specialized in elder abuse cases, a former police detective named Frank Martinez, who treated me with a respect and dignity that made me want to cry. Frank came to my house and installed a hidden camera system, tiny devices disguised as ordinary objects, a picture frame on the bookshelf, a clock on the mantel, even a decorative tissue box in the living room. "These will record everything," Frank explained, "audio and video. If they come here and say anything incriminating, we'll have it all documented." He also showed me how to use a recording app on my phone, walking me through it 3 times until I felt confident I could activate it discreetly during conversations. Then came the hardest part, the part that required me to become an actress in my own life. When Sarah called that evening at 7 o'clock with her usual fake cheerfulness, I took a deep breath and played the role of confused, defeated old woman. "Sarah, honey," I said, my voice trembling just right. "I'm so sorry about yesterday. I got confused and upset. You know how I get sometimes." I could practically hear the relief in her voice. "Oh, Mom, it's okay, I understand. You're just stressed and not thinking clearly. Why don't I come over this weekend and we can talk about everything calmly?" Perfect. I agreed sweetly, telling her how much I looked forward to seeing her. After hanging up, I contacted my other two children through certified letters that James had drafted, formal documents informing them that I knew about their involvement in the conspiracy, and giving them one final chance to come clean and back out before I took legal action. The letters were carefully worded, designed to create panic and division among them. 3 weeks later, after carefully orchestrating every detail with James and Frank, I made the phone calls that would set everything in motion. I invited my entire family to Sunday dinner at my house, just like the old days, using the warmest, most grandmotherly voice I could muster. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I told each of them separately, "and I realize I may have overreacted. I want us all to get together and talk things through like a family should. Please come. It's important to me." Sarah accepted immediately, her voice dripping with false relief and barely concealed triumph. "Oh, Mom, I'm so glad you've come to your senses. Of course we'll be there. This is exactly what we need." David, my middle child, sounded nervous when he called me back. "Mom, are you sure about this? Maybe we should just talk, you and me first." I could hear the guilt eating at him through the phone line, but I kept my voice gentle and forgiving. "No, sweetie. I want everyone there, all my children together. We're family, and family works things out together." Rebecca, my youngest at 39, could barely get the words out. "Mom, I never wanted to hurt you. I just thought—" I cut her off softly. "I know, honey. We'll talk on Sunday, 2 o'clock. Please bring everyone." That Sunday morning, I woke up at dawn and cooked like I hadn't cooked in years. My famous pot roast went into the oven at 8 o'clock, filling the entire house with the rich, comforting aroma that had been the backdrop of 1,000 family dinners. I made garlic mashed potatoes from scratch, green bean casserole, fresh dinner rolls, and a chocolate cake that was Sarah's childhood favorite. The dining room table was set with my good china, the pieces I had collected one at a time from thrift stores over the years, and I placed fresh flowers in the center. To anyone looking in through the windows, it would have appeared to be a scene of domestic peace and love. But hidden in that living room picture frame was a camera recording everything. My phone sat in my cardigan pocket, already set to record audio with a single touch, and parked 2 blocks away in an unmarked car sat James Brennan, my attorney, with copies of every document we had compiled. In another vehicle down the street waited Frank Martinez, the private investigator, and 2 police officers who had been briefed on the situation and were standing by in case things escalated. Everyone was in position. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait. At exactly 2 o'clock, I heard the first car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I watched Sarah emerge with Michael and my grandchildren, Emma and Jake. My heart ached seeing those innocent children, completely unaware that their parents had turned into monsters driven by greed. Emma carried a bouquet of flowers, probably Sarah's idea to make everything seem normal and loving. 5 minutes later, David arrived with his wife Jennifer, both of them looking pale and uncomfortable. Finally, Rebecca pulled up alone, her husband claiming he had to work, though I suspected he wanted nothing to do with this mess. They filed into my house one by one, and I greeted each of them with hugs and smiles that felt like shards of glass in my throat. Sarah kept patting my hand in that condescending way she had developed, treating me like a confused child who had finally seen reason. "Mom, I'm so glad you've decided to be rational about all this," she whispered in my ear as she hugged me. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled sweetly and gestured toward the dining room. We all sat down around that old oak table, the children chattering innocently about school while the adults made strained small talk and avoided eye contact with each other. The tension in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. David kept clearing his throat nervously. Rebecca stared at her plate, unable to look at me directly. Sarah and Michael, however, seemed almost relaxed, clearly believing they had won, that this dinner was my white flag of surrender. I served the food with shaking hands, playing my part perfectly. Everyone had full plates in front of them, steam rising from the pot roast, the smell of home and comfort and family filling the air. The children began to eat, but most of the adults just pushed food around their plates. They were waiting for me to speak, to announce my surrender, to tell them I understood and would cooperate with their plans. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Every eye in the room turned toward me. I reached up and took off my reading glasses, folding them carefully and setting them on the table. Then I looked at each of my children in turn. These people I had carried in my body and raised with every ounce of love I possessed. The room fell completely silent except for the ticking of that old grandfather clock in the hallway. "Before we eat," I said, my voice calm and steady as steel, "I have something very important to share with all of you." I walked slowly to the sideboard where my laptop sat already open and ready, my movements deliberate and calm despite the hurricane of emotions swirling inside my chest. I pressed a single key, and suddenly the dining room filled with sound, voices that made Sarah's face drain of all color in an instant. It was a recording, crystal clear and damning, of her conversation with Michael from 2 weeks ago when they had come to my house thinking I was out at the grocery store. Their voices played through the laptop speakers for everyone to hear. "Once we get the power of attorney finalized, we can have her declared incompetent within a month," Michael's voice said coldly. "My buddy at the care facility said they have an opening in their memory unit. We tell everyone she's got dementia, move her in there, and the house goes on the market immediately." Sarah's laugh in response was cruel and calculated. The best part is she'll never know what hit her. She's so trusting, so pathetically grateful for any attention we give her. God, she's made this almost too easy. The children stopped eating, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. David's wife, Jennifer, gasped audibly. Rebecca started crying, soft sobs that shook her shoulders. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I pressed another key and a different recording played, this one from a phone conversation I had secretly recorded just 5 days ago when Sarah called to check on me. Her voice oozed fake sweetness. "Mom, have you thought any more about signing those papers I left with you? The ones that would make things so much easier for everyone?" And then my own voice, trembling and confused, just as I had practiced. "I don't understand all that legal language, honey. Are you sure this is what's best?" Sarah's response cut through the room like a blade. "Mom, you just need to trust me. Sign where I showed you. You don't need to understand it. I'm taking care of everything." I paused the recording and looked directly at Sarah, whose face had transformed from shock to pure hatred. "Mom, where did you get those? You had no right," she started to say, but I cut her off with a voice I had never used before, a voice filled with steel and righteousness. "No right? You forged my signature to steal my money and you're talking to me about rights?" I pulled out a folder from the sideboard drawer and dropped it on the table with a heavy thud. Papers spilled out, bank statements, copies of the forged documents, police reports, fraud investigation findings. I have every right to protect myself from thieves, even when those thieves happen to be my own children. David stood up, his face red and tears streaming down his cheeks. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this. Sarah said you were getting confused, that we were helping you. I didn't know she forged anything. I swear I didn't know." But before anyone could respond, I held up my hand and played one more recording. This one a conference call between all 3 of my children from 6 weeks ago that my investigator had obtained through Sarah's phone records and a legal subpoena. Their voices filled the room, casual and businesslike as they discussed dividing up my assets. "I get the house proceeds since I'm doing all the paperwork," Sarah said. "You two split the savings account and the life insurance when she dies." Rebecca's voice chimed in, weak but complicit. "What if she lives for another 20 years? David's laugh was bitter. "Then we put her in the cheapest facility we can find and let Medicaid take over. Either way, we're not supporting her." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma, my sweet granddaughter, looked at her mother with confusion and horror. "Mommy, why are you trying to hurt Grandma?" Sarah's mask finally cracked completely. She stood up so violently her chair fell backward and crashed to the floor. "Because she's a selfish old woman who's hoarding money that should belong to us. We're her children. We deserve that money more than some homeless shelter or library." The venom in her voice, the raw greed and entitlement, hung in the air like poison. But I had saved the best for last. I smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who had finally learned that sometimes love requires boundaries, and sometimes justice requires pain. "You wanted my money so desperately, Sarah. You were so convinced it belonged to you?" I pulled out another document, this one freshly notarized with an official seal. "This is my new will, signed and witnessed 3 days ago. Every single penny I have, every asset I own, is now designated to go to charitable organizations. The Maplewood Homeless Shelter, the Public Library Foundation, and the National Center on Elder Abuse Prevention. You will never see 1 cent of it, not 1 single cent." The room erupted in chaos. Sarah started screaming obscenities at me, words I had never heard her use in her entire life. David collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Rebecca ran from the room toward the bathroom, the sound of her retching audible even through the closed door. Michael just sat there, his face hard and calculating, probably already thinking about damage control and lawyers. But the real twist, the moment that made everything worthwhile, came when my front door opened and James Brennan walked in, briefcase in hand, followed by Frank Martinez and 2 uniformed police officers. The children's faces went from red with anger to white with fear in an instant. "What is this?" Sarah demanded, her voice shrill. James's voice was calm and professional as he addressed the room. "I'm James Brennan, Mrs. Thompson's attorney. Everything that has been said in this room today has been recorded and witnessed. We have documented evidence of forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, financial exploitation of an elderly person, and attempted coercion." One of the police officers stepped forward. "Sarah Mitchell and Michael Mitchell, we need you to come down to the station to answer some questions regarding charges of elder financial abuse and fraud." Sarah looked at me with such hatred I barely recognized her as my daughter. "You vindictive, spiteful old witch," she hissed. "I hope you die alone and miserable." The words should have hurt, probably would have hurt just weeks ago, but now they bounced off me like rain off a roof. I looked at her calmly, this stranger wearing my daughter's face, and spoke the truest words I had ever said. "No, sweetheart, I'm not vindictive. I'm just a mother who finally learned that love without respect is worthless, and family built on greed isn't family at all." The legal process that followed was long, exhausting, and painful in ways I hadn't anticipated. But justice, real justice, moved forward with the slow inevitability of a freight train. Sarah and Michael were formally charged with attempted fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation of an elderly person. The evidence we had compiled was overwhelming, ironclad, leaving their expensive lawyers with nothing to work with except plea bargains. They fought it at first, tried to claim I was confused, that I had given permission and simply didn't remember. But the recordings, the hidden camera footage, the timeline of forged documents, and the testimony from bank employees buried them completely. 6 months after that terrible Sunday dinner, they stood in a courtroom and pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for avoiding a trial that would have destroyed what little reputation they had left. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who had clearly seen too many cases like mine, showed no mercy in her sentencing speech. "You violated the trust of the woman who gave you life, who sacrificed everything for your well-being, all because of greed and entitlement. You should be ashamed." Sarah and Michael received 2 years of probation, were ordered to pay $15,000 in fines and restitution, to complete 200 hours of community service at an elder care facility. And most importantly, a permanent restraining order was issued, preventing them from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my home. David and Rebecca's involvement had been less severe, more passive participation than active conspiracy, and James had negotiated immunity for them in exchange for their full cooperation and testimony. But the damage to our relationship had still been catastrophic. For months after the truth came out, I didn't hear from either of them. Then, on a cold February morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox, handwritten on simple notebook paper. It was from David, and it was the most honest thing he had ever written to me. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. I was weak and greedy, and I let Sarah convince me that we were entitled to something that was never ours. I stood by while she planned to hurt you, and that makes me just as guilty. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. I understand if you never want to see me again." I cried when I read that letter, tears that were somehow different from all the tears I had shed before. These were tears of grief, yes, but also of a tiny, fragile hope. I waited 2 weeks before responding, wanting to be sure my words came from a place of clarity rather than emotion. When I finally wrote back, I kept it simple and honest. "David, what you did was unforgivable, but I am willing to work toward rebuilding trust if you are willing to earn it back through actions, not just words. It will take time. It will take proof, but I am not ready to lose my son forever." Rebecca sent a similar letter a month later, and I responded the same way. Slowly, painfully, like trying to reset a broken bone, we began the long process of rebuilding something that would never be the same as it was, but might eventually become something real and honest. But the biggest change came not in my relationships with my children, but in my relationship with myself and my own life. I made the decision to sell my house, not because anyone forced me to, not because I was being manipulated or coerced, but because I chose to. That house held too many ghosts now, too many memories tainted by betrayal. I sold it for $412,000 and used the money to buy a beautiful apartment in Riverside Senior Living, a community about 30 miles away from Maplewood, where nobody knew my story and I could start, fresh. My new home was smaller but filled with light, a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor with a balcony overlooking a garden. I decorated it with only my favorite things, the photographs that still brought me joy, the furniture that held good memories, and left behind everything that carried the weight of pain. For the first time in my entire life, I lived completely for myself. I took watercolor painting classes and discovered I had a talent for landscapes. I joined a book club where we read everything from mystery novels to poetry and debated passionately over coffee and pastries. I made new friends, women and men my age, who had their own stories of survival and resilience, who valued me for who I was rather than what I could give them. I donated $100,000 to the National Center on Elder Abuse Prevention, funding a program that provided free legal assistance to elderly people fighting financial exploitation by family members. The director called me personally to thank me, her voice thick with emotion. "Margaret, you have no idea how many people you're going to help with this gift." But I did know. I knew exactly what it felt like to be vulnerable and betrayed, and if my pain could prevent even one other person from experiencing that same nightmare, then something good had come from it all. The grandchildren whose parents had betrayed me, Emma and Jake, were the hardest loss to bear. For 2 years, the restraining order meant I couldn't see them, couldn't call them, couldn't be part of their lives. But children grow up, and children remember. On Emma's 16th birthday, I received a Facebook message from her. "Grandma, I found you. I'm old enough now to understand what my mom did to you, and I'm so sorry. Can we talk?" We started with emails, then phone calls, and eventually, with the restraining order expired, and Emma, nearly an adult, carefully supervised visits. She told me her mother never spoke about what happened, had painted herself as the victim of a vindictive old woman. But Emma was smart enough to research, to read court documents, to piece together the truth. Some wounds healed, others remained open, scars that would never fully close. But I had survived. More than that, I had reclaimed my dignity, my autonomy, and my right to live the remainder of my life on my own terms. I woke up each morning in my sunny apartment, made my coffee, and felt something I hadn't felt in years before the betrayal. Peace. Not the false peace of ignorance, but the hard-won peace of a woman who had fought for herself and won. I'm 70 years old now, 3 years since that devastating Sunday dinner that changed everything, and as I sit on my balcony watching the sun set over the garden below, I find myself reflecting on the strange and painful journey that brought me to this moment. The evening air is cool and carries the scent of jasmine from the flower beds, and in my hand is a cup of chamomile tea that I made simply because I wanted it, not because I was serving someone else first. This small act of self-care, this tiny declaration that my own needs matter, still feels revolutionary after a lifetime of putting everyone else before myself. I look at the photograph sitting on the table beside me, a picture from Emma's high school graduation last spring. She's wearing her cap and gown, standing next to me with her arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling genuinely. Rebecca is in the photo too, standing a bit awkwardly on my other side, but there nonetheless. David sent flowers to the ceremony with a card that read, "Congratulations, Emma, and thank you, Mom, for being there for her." Small gestures, small steps, but they represent years of painful, honest work to rebuild what was shattered. Sarah is not in the photograph. Sarah has never apologized, never acknowledged what she did, beyond the forced guilty plea her lawyer negotiated. The restraining order has expired, but she has chosen to maintain distance, and honestly, I have made peace with that. Some relationships cannot be salvaged, and sometimes that's okay. The truth I've learned through all of this pain is uncomfortable and complex, but it's a truth that needs to be spoken. We spend our entire lives as parents teaching our children to be kind, to be honest, to be grateful, to respect others. We sacrifice our own comfort, our own dreams, our own desires to give them the best possible start in life. We do this because we love them, because their happiness feels like our happiness, because from the moment they're born we would throw ourselves in front of a train to protect them. But somewhere in all that sacrificing, all that giving, all that putting ourselves last, we sometimes teach them the wrong lesson entirely. By always sacrificing, by always giving, by always making myself smaller so they could be bigger, I had inadvertently taught my children that I had no value except as a resource to be used. I never set boundaries. I never said no. I never demanded respect or reciprocity. I was so busy being the perfect selfless mother that I forgot to teach them that I was also a human being with my own worth, my own needs, my own right to dignity. My love for them was unconditional, but I failed to show them that unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional acceptance of bad behavior. It doesn't mean allowing yourself to be diminished or destroyed. Real love, I've learned, requires boundaries. It requires the courage to say, "This is unacceptable," even to people you would die for. Real family is not built on obligation or blood relation alone. It's built on mutual respect, on seeing each other as whole human beings rather than as roles to be filled or assets to be claimed. And real strength, the kind that matters, sometimes means saying no to the people you love most, means protecting yourself even when it breaks your heart to do so. I spent 67 years believing that being a good mother meant endless self-sacrifice. Now I know that being a good mother also means modeling self-respect, teaching through example that every person, regardless of age, deserves to be treated with dignity. Greed is a poison that destroys families from the inside out, so quietly and insidiously that you don't realize it's happening until everything is already contaminated. It turns children into strangers and parents into victims. It transforms love into transaction, relationship into calculation. My children didn't start out greedy or cruel. They were sweet babies, curious toddlers, thoughtful teenagers. But somewhere along the way, in a culture that measures worth in dollars and teaches that you deserve whatever you can take, they lost sight of what truly matters. They looked at me and saw not their mother, not the woman who had held them through nightmares and celebrated their triumphs, but saw property values and bank account balances and inheritance projections. But here's the thing about betrayal that nobody tells you. As devastating and soul-crushing as it can also be a strange kind of gift if you're strong enough to receive it. Betrayal freed me from illusions I had been clinging to, from false relationships built on my fear of being alone rather than on genuine connection. It showed me who truly cared about me and who only cared about what I could provide. It forced me to learn, at an age when most people think they're done learning, how to value myself, how to fight for myself, how to build a life based on authenticity rather than obligation. Would I have chosen this path? Never. Would I trade the pain I've endured to have my old life back? Some days, in my weaker moments, maybe. But most days, sitting here in my beautiful apartment surrounded by friends who chose me and activities that fulfill me, I recognize that this life, this honest, bounded, self-respecting life, is better than the one built on lies and exploitation. If you're watching this and you have elderly parents or grandparents, I want you to hear this and hear it clearly. Their worth is not in their wallets or their property or what they can leave you when they die. They are human beings with thoughts, feelings, dreams, and dignity that deserves to be protected until their very last breath. The money they've saved, the homes they've built, the possessions they've accumulated, those things belong to them to use as they see fit for as long as they live. You are not entitled to any of it simply because you share DNA. Your inheritance is not your right, it's their choice. And if you truly love them, you will value their presence in your life infinitely more than their presence when they're gone. If you're watching this as an elderly person who suspects you might be experiencing financial abuse or manipulation, please know that you are not alone and you are not helpless. There are resources, lawyers who specialize in elder law, organizations dedicated to protecting people exactly like us. And most importantly, you still have power even when people are trying to convince you that you don't. It's not too late to fight back. It's not too late to protect yourself. You deserve dignity and respect regardless of your age, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to take advantage of you. And if you're watching this as someone who has betrayed an elderly family member's trust for financial gain, I hope my story haunts you. I hope you look at yourself in the mirror and feel the weight of what you've done. But more than that, I hope you find the courage to stop, to apologize genuinely, and to make whatever amends are still possible. Some damage cannot be undone, but redemption is still possible. If you're willing to do the hard, humble work of earning back trust you should never have violated in the first place. My story doesn't have a Hollywood ending where everything is perfectly resolved and everyone lives happily ever after. Some relationships were permanently destroyed. Some wounds will never fully heal. I lost children I thought I would have in my life forever. But I gained something too. I gained myself. I gained peace. I gained the knowledge that I was strong enough to survive the worst betrayal imaginable and still build a life worth living. I gained friendships based on authenticity. I gained the satisfaction of knowing that my money will help other people rather than reward the ones who tried to steal it. And I gained the absolute certainty that I will never again allow anyone, not even people I love, to treat me as less than the full human being I am. So now I want to hear from you, from everyone watching this story. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have forgiven your children immediately and let them take what they wanted? Would you have fought back like I did, pursuing legal justice and protecting your assets? Or would you have found some middle path I couldn't see? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and your perspectives matter to me. If this story touched you, if it made you think or feel or question something, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, whether that's an elderly person who might be experiencing abuse, an adult child who needs a wake-up call, or simply someone who believes that family and respect matter more than money. And please subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories about family, betrayal, justice, and the complicated truth of human relationships. Remember this above all else. It is never, ever too late to stand up for yourself. It doesn't matter if you're 17 or 70 or 97. You have worth, you have rights, and you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Not your children, not your relatives, not anyone. You matter, your life matters, and you are stronger than you think. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who needs it. And I hope it reminds all of us that the best inheritance we can leave our children is not money, but the example of how to live with integrity, courage, and self-respect, even when it costs us everything.